I was somewhere over the Pacific 30,000 feet above the water when my phone buzzed and everything I believed about family cracked open. I had been counting the hours until I'd be home for Christmas, until I'd smell pine and cinnamon, until I'd hear my father's voice say my name like it still belonged to him. Instead, I read 7 words that stopped my heart cold. Don't come home. Your sister doesn't want drama. I didn't know then that I was about to spend Christmas dinner alone in a restaurant staring at a stranger's table like it was something I'd never be allowed to have. And I definitely didn't know that 5 years later those same strangers would be introduced at my wedding as my parents, while my real family stood frozen in the back of the room realizing they'd lost me for good. My name is Rachel Morgan, and I was 31 years old that winter. I was serving in the U.S. Air Force stationed in Okinawa, Japan, and I had been counting down to Christmas like a kid with an advent calendar. Okinawa in December didn't feel like Christmas. No snow, no breath-fogging cold, just humid air and palm trees that made December feel like a lie. But I'd done my time overseas. I'd missed birthdays, funerals, anniversaries. Christmas was supposed to be the one thing I didn't miss. I had my ticket booked months in advance. Okinawa to Seattle, Seattle to Denver, non-refundable of course. I'd splurged on a window seat for the long flight, imagining myself watching the clouds and thinking about home, about my dad's old record player, the one he pulled out every December, about the same crooked angel my mom insisted on putting at the top of the tree. I was already on the first leg of the flight when the message came through. It wasn't a call. That should have been my first warning. It was a text from my father. Don't come home. Your sister doesn't want drama. That was it. No, hey, sweetheart. No, we need to talk. Just 7 flat words like a door quietly locking from the inside. At first I stared at the screen, convinced I'd misunderstood. I reread it again. Then again. The plane hummed around me. Someone nearby was watching a movie, the glow of the screen flickering in my peripheral vision. A flight attendant pushed a cart down the aisle, the smell of coffee drifting past. I typed back, my fingers stiff. What do you mean, don't come home? I'm already flying. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Your sister is already stressed. We don't need anything setting her off right now. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard and typed. Setting her off how? I just want to come home for Christmas. This time the reply came faster. You know how things get when you're around. Let's just keep the peace this year. Keep the peace. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I'd heard those words my entire life. They always meant the same thing. Rachel, be smaller. Rachel, don't ask. Rachel, swallow it. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. I tried again, same thing. The flight attendant announced turbulence, her voice calm and practiced. My hands were shaking. I stared at the seat back in front of me, at the tiny scratches and scuffs left by 1,000 anonymous passengers, and felt something hollow open up inside my chest. I thought about my sister Emily, 2 years older, the golden child, the one who stayed close to home, married young, gave my parents the life they understood. Emily, who had never once visited me overseas. Emily, who said my uniform made her uncomfortable because it reminded her that bad things happen. Apparently I was the bad thing. I opened my notes app and started typing, not knowing why. Maybe I needed proof that this was real. December 23rd, somewhere over the Pacific. Dad told me not to come home. My reflection stared back at me from the darkened window. I looked older than 31, tired. My hair was pulled back in the same regulation bun I wore every day. I wondered briefly if my family even noticed how much of myself I'd given up over the years to be the version of me they could tolerate. When we landed in Seattle hours later, the airport was dressed up for Christmas, twinkling lights wrapped around pillars, fake wreaths hanging from signs. Families rushed past me, dragging suitcases, kids bouncing with excitement, couples arguing softly about baggage claim. I stood there with my carry-on at my feet and realized something awful. I had nowhere to go. I could have booked a hotel. I could have tried to reroute my ticket. But pride, or maybe exhaustion, kept me still. I told myself I'd think more clearly after I ate. Food first, decisions later. That's how I ended up walking into a small restaurant just off the airport shuttle route, one of the few places open on Christmas Eve. Warm light spilled through the windows. Inside, the air smelled like roasted meat and butter, and something sweet baking in the back. "Just one?" the hostess asked gently, already knowing the answer. "Just one," I said. She led me to a small table near the wall. Not quite in the corner, but close enough that I could disappear if I needed to. I shrugged out of my coat and sat down, my phone face up on the table like I was waiting for it to apologize. It didn't. Around me, families filled the room. A man in a Santa hat lifted a toddler into his lap. An older couple clinked glasses, laughing at some private joke. At the table beside me sat a large group: grandparents, parents, kids, all leaning toward each other, passing dishes without asking. I ordered the Christmas special and told myself I was fine. I wasn't. When my plate arrived, turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce arranged like something from a magazine, I couldn't taste a single bite. My throat burned. I kept my eyes down, pushing food around, pretending the tightness in my chest was just jet lag. And then I heard a chair scrape softly beside me. "Honey," a woman's voice said, warm and concerned, "are you all right?" I looked up startled and met the eyes of the older woman from the table next to me. Silver hair, kind face, the sort of presence that made you feel seen even when you didn't want to be. "I'm fine," I said automatically, "just tired." She studied me for a second, then gave a small, knowing smile. "Tired doesn't usually look like that," she said gently. I felt my eyes sting. I looked away, embarrassed, and laughed weakly. "I didn't mean to ruin your dinner," I said. "You didn't," she replied. "But no one should eat alone on Christmas Eve." She glanced back at her table where a man about her age was watching us with curiosity, and then she looked back at me. "Why don't you come join us?" she said. "There's more than enough food, and too much pie." I hesitated, every instinct screaming not to intrude. But then she added softly, "You look like you could use a place to land." Something inside me broke, and I nodded. I stood up from my table on legs that felt strangely unsteady, like I'd been sitting for hours instead of minutes. The older woman smiled at me, as if she'd known I would say yes all along. She picked up my plate without asking and waved me toward her family's table. "Come on," she said, "we'll make room." And they did, immediately. A chair was pulled out, someone slid over. A napkin was placed in front of me like I'd always belonged there. I didn't even have time to feel awkward before a man with kind eyes and a weathered face stood up and offered his hand. "I'm Tom," he said, "and you're very welcome." "Rachel," I managed. My voice sounded smaller than I felt. "I'm Claire," the woman said, squeezing my shoulder before sitting back down. "That's my husband, Tom, our son, Mark, and his wife, Julia. And those are our grandkids, Lily and Owen." The kids waved at me with the casual curiosity of children who hadn't yet learned to be suspicious of strangers. Lily, maybe 8 or 9, smiled like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Hi," she said, "do you like pie?" I laughed despite myself. "I do." "Good," she said seriously. "We have a lot." Someone passed me a basket of rolls. Someone else refilled my water. The conversation flowed around me like a warm current, gentle teasing, overlapping stories, the comfortable noise of people who knew each other well enough not to perform. I didn't talk much at first, I just listened. And for the first time in hours, my chest loosened. "So what brings you here on Christmas Eve?" Rachel Mark asked after a while, handing me the mashed potatoes. I hesitated. I could have lied. I almost did. But something about the way they all looked at me, not curious, not prying, just open, made the truth feel less dangerous. "I was supposed to go home," I said quietly. "My flight landed a few hours ago." And Claire prompted gently. "And my dad texted me mid-flight and told me not to come." The table went still, not dramatically, just attentive. Tom's brows knit together. "He told you not to come home for Christmas." I nodded. My sister didn't want drama. Julia's mouth tightened. "Drama," she repeated like the word tasted bad. I stared down at my plate. Apparently that's what I am. Claire didn't say anything right away. She just reached over and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm and steady. "Can I ask what kind of drama?" she said. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I wish I knew. As the conversation moved on, my mind drifted back not just to the text, but to everything that had led up to it. To the pattern I'd spent years pretending wasn't there. I remembered being 18, standing in formation at basic training graduation, scanning the bleachers for familiar faces. Everyone else had someone, parents waving signs, siblings shouting names. I'd spotted my dad eventually standing alone near the back. Emily hadn't come. She had a brunch she couldn't miss. Dad hugged me afterward, stiff and proud. "You did good," he'd said. Then, almost apologetically, "Your sister sends her love." She always sent her love, from a distance. Then there was my first deployment. Okinawa had felt impossibly far from home. The days were long, the work relentless. I called when I could, often at odd hours. Most of the time it went to voicemail. When I finally got through, my mom talked about Emily's new house, Emily's promotion, Emily's stress. "You know how sensitive she is," Mom had said once when I mentioned feeling left out. "Don't make things harder for her. Don't make things harder." I learned early that being the easy one meant being the invisible one. Across the table, Tom cleared his throat. "What do you do, Rachel?" "I'm Air Force," I said. "Logistics." His eyes softened. "Thank you for your service." I shrugged, uncomfortable. "It's just my job." "No," he said gently. "It's more than that." Something about the way he said it made my throat ache. After dinner, as plates were cleared and pie was served, apple pecan, something chocolate that Lily insisted was the best one, Claire shifted her chair closer to mine. "How long have you been away from home?" she asked quietly. "Almost 6 years," I said. "Okinawa's my second assignment." "And in all that time," she said carefully, "has your family ever come to see you?" I opened my mouth, closed it again. "No," I admitted. She nodded like she'd expected that answer. "Rachel, I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and you can take it or leave it." I looked at her. "Okay." "In my experience," she said, "the people who accuse others of causing drama are often the ones who benefit most from silence." The words landed softly, but they hit hard. I swallowed. "So what am I supposed to do?" She smiled, not unkindly. "For tonight, eat your pie. For tomorrow," she shrugged. "That takes longer." When the check came, I reached for my wallet out of habit. Tom waved me off immediately. "Absolutely not," he said. "You're our guest." "I can't." "You can," Claire said firmly, "and you will." Outside, the air was cold and sharp, the kind that wakes you up. Snow had started to fall soft and steady. The kids ran ahead, laughing, their breath puffing out in little clouds. Claire pressed a small card into my hand before we parted ways. "If you ever need somewhere to be," she said, "we're here." I watched them walk away together, arms linked, and felt something shift inside me. Not fixed, not healed, but steadied. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed once, a message from my father. "We hope you understand." I didn't reply. For the first time, I wondered what it might be like to stop trying. I lay awake most of that night listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the hotel pipes, knocking softly in the walls, distant laughter from another room, the occasional whoosh of a car passing outside. Snowlight seeped through the thin curtains, turning the ceiling a pale blue. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's text again, those 7 words replaying like a loop I couldn't shut off. "Don't come home. Your sister doesn't want drama." By morning, the ache in my chest had dulled into something heavier and quieter. Not anger, not sadness exactly, more like resignation. I checked my phone out of habit. No missed calls, no Merry Christmas, nothing from my parents, nothing from Emily. I told myself I wasn't surprised, that I should have known better than to expect anything else. Still, knowing something intellectually and feeling it settle into your bones were two very different things. I showered, dressed, and sat on the edge of the bed with my boots in my hands, unsure what to do next. I could spend the day alone, order room service, watch whatever holiday movie the hotel TV was playing on a loop. It would be easier, quieter. But something in me resisted that idea with unexpected force. Maybe it was what Claire had said the night before, or maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time someone had noticed my loneliness without being asked. Before I could overthink it, I pulled out the small card she'd given me. Her handwriting was neat and confident. "Claire and Tom Anderson. Call anytime." I stared at it for a long moment, then slipped it back into my pocket. I wasn't ready to call, but I wasn't ready to disappear either. So I went back to the restaurant. It felt strange walking in alone again in daylight this time. Christmas music played softly through hidden speakers. The same hostess looked up and smiled. "Back again?" she asked. I nodded, "If that's okay." "Of course," she said. "Take your time." I chose a table near the window and ordered coffee, watching the snow drift past like it had nowhere urgent to be. Families came and went. Laughter floated through the room in gentle bursts. And then I saw them. Claire and Tom were already seated at a large table near the center, coats draped over the backs of chairs, coffee cups steaming. Mark and Julia were there too, the kids coloring quietly between them. Claire spotted me almost immediately. "There you are," she said, standing up like she'd been expecting me. My instinct was to apologize, for intruding, for assuming, but she didn't give me the chance. "Come sit with us," she said simply. Tom smiled. "We saved you a chair." Something about the word saved made my throat tighten. The day unfolded gently after that, without any pressure or big declarations. We talked about small things, movies, the snow, travel delays. When Mark asked about my job, it wasn't with the usual mix of discomfort and forced admiration I'd grown used to. He was genuinely interested. "Okinawa must be beautiful," Julia said. "But far." "It is," I agreed, and it is. Lily asked me what it was like living so far away from everyone I knew. I hesitated, then answered honestly, "You get used to it, or you think you do." Tom studied me for a moment. "You don't have to get used to everything," he said quietly. That afternoon, when they invited me to join them for dinner the next day, I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. And then yes again the week after that. And again after that. I flew back to Okinawa a few days later with a strange, unfamiliar feeling in my chest. Not dread, not relief. Hope. Over the next months, Claire emailed me recipes. Tom sent pictures of the kids' school projects. Mark checked in when a typhoon rolled through my area. None of it was dramatic. None of it was overwhelming. It was just steady. When I came home on leave that spring, I stayed in a small rental near their house instead of my parents'. No one commented on it. No one made me feel guilty. Claire simply handed me a mug of coffee the first morning and said, "We're glad you're here." My parents didn't call. Emily didn't text. At first I waited for the familiar sting. It never came. Instead, Sundays became something I looked forward to. Long dinners, easy conversations, the kids asking when I'd be back next, Tom teaching me how to grill without burning everything. Claire listening, really listening when I talked about work, about the quiet pressure of being the dependable one, the easy one. One evening after the dishes were done and the kids were in bed, Claire sat beside me on the couch. "You don't have to answer this," she said, "but I'm going to ask anyway." I braced myself. "Okay." "Do you miss them?" she asked. "Your parents?" I thought about it, really thought. "I miss the idea of them," I said finally. "I miss who I thought they were supposed to be." She nodded like that made perfect sense. That's a hard thing to grieve. Grieve. The word settled over me, uncomfortable but true. Months passed, years even. I built a life that didn't revolve around waiting for permission to belong. I was promoted. I moved to a new assignment stateside. The Andersons were there for all of it, cheering quietly, consistently. And somewhere along the way I stopped feeling like a guest. I felt like family. I didn't know then how deeply that would matter, or how much it would change the shape of my future. I only knew this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't eating alone. It happened gradually, the way real things usually do, not with declarations or promises, but with repetition, with showing up again and again until the unfamiliar became normal. By the second year after that Christmas, the Andersons weren't the family I'd met at a restaurant. They were just my people. Sunday dinners turned into a standing tradition. If I was in town, there was a place for me at the table. If I wasn't, there was a text, "Safe travels," or "We'll save you leftovers." When my schedule changed at the last minute, no one sighed or accused me of ruining plans. Claire simply said, "We'll adjust." I wasn't used to that. People adjusting for me. Back home, growing up, everything had been calibrated around Emily. Her moods, her needs, her stress. If something went wrong, the question was never what happened. It was, "Rachel, what did you do to upset her?" With the Andersons, there was no hierarchy like that. No one had to shrink for someone else to feel bigger. One evening after dinner, I sat on the back porch with Tom while the others cleaned up inside. The air was cool, the sky washed in the soft colors of early fall. Tom leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his stomach. "You don't talk much about your father," he said, not accusing, just noticing. I stared out at the yard. There's not much to say. He nodded. Sometimes that says more than words. I thought about my dad then, about how proud he'd been when I enlisted, at least in public, how he'd told his friends I was doing something meaningful. But pride, I'd learned, was different from protection, different from showing up when it mattered. Do you think people know when they're failing their kids? I asked quietly. Tom considered that. Some do, some don't, and some know, but it's easier not to change. That landed harder than I expected. It was around that time that Mark and I started spending more time together, just the two of us. Not intentionally, it just happened. A coffee here, a walk there. Conversations that drifted late into the evening without either of us noticing the time. He never pushed, never rushed. He knew my job, the demands of it, the way distance had shaped me. He asked questions, but he also listened to the answers. One night after we'd been talking for hours about nothing and everything, he said, "You know, you don't have to earn your place here, right?" I laughed softly. I don't know how to do that. You'll learn, he said. You're already learning. My parents remained silent through all of it. No calls, no emails. On my birthday, a generic card arrived with a short message. Hope you're doing well. No return address. Emily's handwriting. I put it in a drawer and didn't think about it again. What I did think about often was the strange, growing sense of safety I felt with the Andersons. How my shoulders relaxed the moment I walked into their house. How I didn't rehearse conversations in my head beforehand. How I wasn't afraid of saying the wrong thing. One afternoon, as Claire and I sat at the kitchen table rolling out dough for a pie, she glanced at me and said, "You know, Rachel, families aren't just about where you come from." I smiled faintly. I'm starting to believe that. She set down her rolling pin. They're about who shows up, over and over. The words stayed with me. 2 years after that Christmas Eve, Mark asked me to marry him. It wasn't flashy, no crowd, no spectacle, just the two of us standing in the kitchen after dinner, the house quiet, the kids already asleep upstairs. He took my hands and looked at me with that steady calm I'd come to rely on. "I choose you," he said. "Every day. Will you choose me?" I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "I choose you." When we told the family, Claire cried enough for both of us. Tom hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "We've always known," Claire said, wiping her eyes. "We were just waiting for you." Waiting for me? The words echoed in my chest long after the excitement settled. As we began planning the wedding, one question kept circling in my mind, quiet but insistent. Parents of the bride. Every time I saw the phrase, something twisted in my stomach. My parents hadn't been there for the last 5 years of my life. Not for promotions, not for moves, not for the quiet, difficult work of becoming someone new. They hadn't chosen me. How could I put their names on an invitation like that? One evening, pacing the living room with the draft of the program in my hands, I finally said it out loud. "I don't know what to do about my parents." Claire looked up from her book. "What do you mean?" "I can't pretend," I said. "I can't give them a place they haven't earned." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said carefully, "Do you remember something I mentioned once? About family being something you can build, not just inherit?" I nodded. "There are ways," she continued, "to make that official, if that's something you want." My heart started to pound. Official how? She met my gaze steady and sure. Adult adoption. The word felt strange in my mouth, heavy, real. That's a thing," I asked. "It is," she said, "and it doesn't erase your past. It just protects your future." I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn love that came with conditions, about the people who had shown up without being asked. For the first time, the idea of choosing, truly choosing, felt possible. And right. I didn't answer Claire right away. The word adoption echoed in my head long after she said it, settling into the quiet spaces of my thoughts. Adult adoption. It sounded formal, final, like a line you didn't cross unless you were absolutely sure. That night, lying in bed beside Mark, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what it would mean. It wasn't about erasing my parents. I knew that. No legal document could undo childhood memories, the smell of my mother's cooking, the sound of my father's footsteps in the hallway, when I was little, the way he used to braid my hair before school when Mom worked early shifts. Those things were real. They had happened. But so had everything else. The years of being told to keep the peace, the way Emily's needs always came first, the silence when I needed someone to stand up for me, the text message that told me not to come home for Christmas like I was an inconvenience instead of a daughter. "Are you okay?" Mark asked quietly, rolling onto his side to face me. "I'm thinking," I said. "About what?" "About whether it's wrong to want this," I admitted, "to want them, to be my parents." He didn't hesitate. Wanting to be chosen isn't wrong. "But people will talk," I said. "They'll say it's dramatic, extreme, that I'm overreacting." Mark reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "People said that when you set boundaries before. Did that make you wrong?" I thought about it. About how every time I'd tried to advocate for myself and my family, I'd been told I was making things harder than they needed to be. "No," I said slowly, "it didn't." "Then this doesn't either," he said. The next morning, I sat across from Claire at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee warming my hands. Sunlight streamed in through the window, catching dust motes in the air. It felt like an ordinary moment that somehow made what I was about to say feel even more significant. "If we do this," I said carefully, "I need to understand everything." Claire nodded, "Of course." She explained it calmly without pressure. Adult adoption meant a legal parent-child relationship, new next-of-kin status, new legal recognition. It didn't require cutting contact with my biological parents. It simply acknowledged the reality of who had been acting as my family. "You don't owe this to us," she said, meeting my eyes. "And we don't need a piece of paper to care about you. But if you want the security, the clarity, if you want the law to match your life, then it's an option." The law to match my life. That phrase stayed with me. I asked for time. No one rushed me. No one hovered. The decision was mine in a way so few things had ever been. I called my parents that week, not to ask permission, just to see. My mother answered on the third ring, surprised. "Oh," she said, "Rachel." "Hi, Mom." There was a pause filled with the faint sound of a television in the background. "We heard you're engaged," she said finally. "Yes," I replied, "I am." "Well," she said, then hesitated. "That's nice." I waited. Nothing else came. "I wanted to tell you myself," I said. "We've been busy," she replied. "Emily's had a lot going on." Of course she had. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time staring at nothing. The call hadn't hurt the way I thought it might. It just confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't choosing new parents. I was acknowledging the ones I already had. The adoption process took several months. Paperwork, meetings, court dates. Through it all, Claire was careful to make sure I never felt obligated. "You can stop at any point," she reminded me more than once. But I didn't want to stop. The day we stood before the judge, I wore my service dress uniform, not out of obligation, but because it represented the woman I'd become, the one who made decisions and stood by them. The judge was kind, businesslike. He asked me if I understood the permanence of what I was doing. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. He asked Tom and Claire if they understood the responsibility they were accepting. They didn't hesitate. "We do," Tom said, "and we already carry it." When the judge signed the final order, something inside me loosened. Not dramatically, quietly, like a knot that had been there so long I'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be. Afterward, Claire hugged me and whispered, "Welcome home, sweetheart." For the first time, the word home didn't feel complicated. We didn't announce the adoption. We didn't post about it. It wasn't a statement meant for the world. It was a boundary drawn in ink instead of tears. Wedding planning continued. Invitations were printed, programs designed. On one proof, I stared at the line I'd dreaded for years. Parents of the bride, Tom and Claire Anderson. Seeing it there, simple, unremarkable, made my eyes sting. My biological parents weren't mentioned, not out of spite, out of honesty. I knew they'd find out eventually. Families always did. Someone would talk. A cousin would mention it. Emily would hear and react the way she always did, by making it about herself. But I wasn't afraid anymore. 5 years earlier, I'd been a woman sitting alone at a restaurant table, wondering what was wrong with me. Now I was standing firmly in a life I'd chosen, surrounded by people who had chosen me back. And whatever came next, I was ready. The morning of the wedding arrived soft and golden, the kind of day people talk about later and say things like, "We couldn't have planned it better if we tried." The sky was clear, the air warm, but not heavy, a light breeze carrying the scent of flowers and fresh grass through the open windows of the venue. I stood in the bridal suite in front of a tall mirror, my dress hanging perfectly from my shoulders, my hair pinned just the way Claire liked it. Elegant, understated, nothing that felt like I was pretending to be someone else. When I looked at my reflection, I didn't see the woman who'd once questioned her worth at 30,000 feet over the Pacific. I saw someone steadier, someone grounded. Claire stood behind me, adjusting the clasp of a necklace Tom had given me that morning. Her hands were calm, practiced. "You look beautiful," she said softly. I smiled at her in the mirror. "You taught me how not to apologize for taking up space." She laughed quietly. "I always suspected you knew how already." Outside guests were arriving, their voices floating up in a low, happy murmur. Somewhere beyond the walls, Mark was pacing, probably checking his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Everything felt right. Still, there was a tension under the surface, a thread I couldn't quite ignore. Not fear, anticipation. "Security checked in," Claire said, gently reading my expression. "Everything's in place." I nodded. "Thank you." I hadn't told her why I'd insisted on security until weeks after we'd booked it. When I finally explained about my parents, about the way they crossed boundaries when they felt entitled, she hadn't questioned me once. "We'll handle whatever comes," she'd said. Together. The ceremony itself passed like a dream. Tom walked me down the aisle, his arm steady and warm through mine. When I reached the front and saw Mark waiting for me, his eyes bright and full, something inside me clicked into place. This was it. This was the life I'd built. We said our vows. There were tears, laughter, applause that felt like a wave carrying us forward. When we kissed and the officiant pronounced us married, I felt light in a way I never had before. The reception followed in a blur of music and movement. Glasses clinked. People hugged me, congratulated us, told us how perfect everything was. I danced with Tom. I cried with Claire. I laughed with the kids until my sides hurt. And then, halfway through the evening, I saw them. They stood just inside the entrance, unsure, out of place. My mother's hair was styled too carefully, her smile tight and uncertain. My father hovered beside her, hands clasped in front of him, eyes scanning the room like he was looking for an exit. My biological parents. No invitation, no warning. For a moment, everything else faded. The music softened. The room seemed to narrow until it was just the three of us, separated by years of silence and one very visible truth. They had come anyway. I felt Mark at my side almost immediately. "Do you want me to—" "No," I said quietly. "I've got this." The security guard approached, discreet, professional. "Ma'am." "Let them stay," I said, "but seat them in the back." He hesitated only a second, then nodded. As they were led to a small table near the edge of the room, my mother looked around, confusion deepening with every step. She clearly expected something else. Recognition, a role. They didn't get one. A few minutes later, the music lowered again. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone, smiling broadly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said before we continue with the celebration, "we'd like to take a moment to recognize some very special people." My mother straightened in her chair. I saw it happen. I saw the assumptions settle in. "Please join me in welcoming the parents of the bride," the MC continued. There was a pause, a breath held by an entire room. Tom and Claire Anderson. The applause was immediate and warm. People turned toward the head table, smiling, clapping, some even standing. Tom rose, clearly surprised, despite knowing this moment was coming. Claire stood beside him, her hand finding his, her eyes already shining with tears. I watched my mother's face change in real time. Confusion, disbelief, then understanding. She turned sharply toward my father, her lips moving in a silent question. My father looked as stunned as she did. Around them, no one noticed. To the rest of the room, Tom and Claire were exactly what they appeared to be, my parents. The applause faded. The music resumed. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Heads turned. Conversations stalled. She crossed the room with purpose, my father trailing behind her like he didn't know where else to go. "What is going on?" she demanded in a low, furious whisper when she reached me. "Who are those people?" I met her gaze, calm and steady. My parents. Her mouth fell open. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking," I said. My father finally spoke. "Rachel, what did he mean by that?" "I was adopted," I said simply, 2 years ago. The words seemed to knock the air out of them. "You can't just replace us," my mother said, her voice rising. "I didn't replace you," I replied. "You stepped away. I built something new." "This is humiliating," she hissed, glancing around at the guests beginning to watch openly now. "I didn't invite you," I said quietly. "You came anyway." My father's shoulders sagged. He looked older than I remembered, smaller. "I should have called," he said hoarsely. "I should have done better." I nodded. "You should have." There it was, the apology I'd waited years to hear. And it came far too late. "I'm not angry," I said, "but I'm not available to fix this for you." Claire stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on my back. Tom stood beside her, his presence solid and unmistakable. The security guard returned respectful but firm. "Ma'am, sir, it's time." My mother stared at me like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. Maybe she didn't. As they were escorted out, the room exhaled. The music swelled again. Someone started clapping, then another, not for the spectacle, for the boundary. Mark took my hands, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "You okay?" I took a breath, let it out slowly. "Yes," I said, and for the first time I meant it. The rest of the night unfolded more gently than I expected. After my parents were escorted out, there was no whispering storm, no dramatic fallout that swallowed the celebration. If anything, the room seemed to relax. The tension I'd been carrying for years, quiet, invisible, always humming in the background, lifted, and in its place came laughter, music, movement, life continuing exactly as it should. Mark and I danced until my feet ached. Tom twirled Claire on the dance floor like they were 20 again, her laugh ringing out bright and unguarded. The kids fell asleep in chairs pushed together near the edge of the room, shoes kicked off cheeks flushed from too much cake and excitement. At one point, I slipped outside onto the terrace alone. The air was cooler now, night settling in. String lights glowed softly above me, and beyond the venue the land stretched out quiet and dark. I leaned against the railing and let myself breathe. I thought I'd feel victorious, triumphant, some sharp sense of revenge. I didn't. What I felt instead was calm. Footsteps approached behind me. Tom stopped at my side, hands tucked into his pockets. "You did good in there," he said. "I didn't plan to confront them," I admitted. "I just didn't want to run anymore." He nodded. Standing still can be braver than fighting. A little later, my phone buzzed. A message from a cousin I barely spoke to. "Your mom is devastated. Family is family no matter what." I read it once, then I deleted it. Another message followed this one from an aunt I hadn't heard from in years. "I know this couldn't have been easy. I'm proud of you." That one I kept. Over the next few weeks, the noise came and went. A vague post on social media from my mother about ungrateful children. A second-hand message from Emily accusing me of making everything about myself. Each one sounded exactly like the voices I'd learned to tune out. And for the first time, I didn't engage. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. Life moved forward. Mark and I settled into our home. A small place, nothing extravagant, but filled with warmth. Sunday dinners continued now, with an extra chair always pulled close to mine. I stayed in touch with a few relatives who showed up quietly, respectfully. The rest faded into the background where they belonged. One evening, months later, I sat at the Andersons' table again, my table, watching Claire pass a bowl of potatoes, watching Tom sneak an extra roll when he thought no one was looking. And it hit me. This was the moment my younger self had been waiting for her entire life. Not the apology, not the recognition. Belonging. I used to think revenge looked like winning an argument, like proving someone wrong, like watching the people who hurt you finally understand your pain. But that's not what this was. This was choosing not to carry the weight anymore. This was building a life so full that there was no room left for people who only showed up to take. Setting boundaries wasn't revenge. It was survival. If you're listening to this, and you've been called dramatic just for asking to be treated fairly, if you've been told to keep the peace while pieces of yourself were chipped away, if you've ever sat alone at a table wondering what you did wrong, I want you to hear this clearly. It wasn't you, it never was. You deserve a seat at the table, not as an afterthought, not as a compromise, not because you stayed quiet long enough. You deserve to be chosen. And if the people who were supposed to choose you didn't, you're allowed to build something new. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from, or share a moment when you had to choose yourself. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, stories about healing boundaries and finding family in unexpected places, please subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We're walking this path together.